In some previous projects, when I've defined a class with its own data fields, a number of internal variables, I've allowed direct access to those variables. So you can see here I've got CD ob class with 4 internal variables, 4 fields: name, artist, price, and CD label. And in my code, when I've created a CD object, I've been able to assign values directly to those fields. Now that's, as a general principle, not really a very good thing to do, to give direct access. It's better to treat a class, to treat the objects created from a class as black boxes, things that wrap up their own internal data and only give access in well-defined channels using methods. And one way of helping to do this is by using properties. Now I want to explain properties now. So here's the properties sample project. And here's a class. You can see that I've defined a bookob class with name and author. I've called them underscore name and underscore author. That's a naming tradition that's used in many languages. When you have private variables inside the class, you precede them with an underscore. Some Pascal programmers use an F, could be a lowercase f or an uppercase F, to show that these are fields. But I've stuck to a convention which is well established across many different languages, and it doesn't really matter as long as you stick to some easy to understand convention. So my private variables are name, underscore name, and underscore author. They've been put into a section of my class called strict private. Now, private has the effect of making the variables declared in that section available throughout the current code unit. This code unit contains more than just the bookob class. It also contains the definition of my form and some procedures, some methods that belong to that form. And I don't want those methods to have access to the private variables of my class. If I'd put the class into a separate code file, and in a large project I probably would have done that, then the keyword private alone would have been sufficient. Since I want the variables to be strictly private only to objects of the bookob class, then I've had to put strict private to ensure that other code in this unit cannot gain access to them. And I've also got a private procedure called add author. Below that is a public section. And the two things I want to concentrate on here are the properties. So they're preceded by the keyword property, and the properties are called name and author. Now you've seen properties many times before. When you are in the Visual Designer and you select a button, you can set properties in the Properties panel here. And you could also set those properties using code. So if I wanted to set the caption, I could, in my code, put the button name, say button1 dot caption colon equals, and then a string that I want to assign to that button. So those properties are available in my code as well as in the Properties panel. The thing I want to bring out here is that properties are not limited just to visual controls. You can create properties for your own classes, and that's what I'm doing here. So let's look at property name. This is of the type bookstring, which is the same as the underscore name private variable. And what it says here is that it has read access to the private variable underscore name and write access also to the private variable underscore name. In other words, I can get the value in my code, that's read access, and I can set the value in my code, that's write access. And I do that by using the name property rather than underscore name as the variable name. Let's have a look at this in code. So here in button 2 click, you can see that I've assigned the name property by getting the text property from the name edit text box and assigning it to abook.name. Because the underscore name variable is private, I can't do this. it looks as though it's okay, it looks correct syntax. But if I try to run it, it says it can't find it. Now, if I remove the strict part of this declaration up here, then it does run. But I specifically don't want that to happen. I don't want to allow code outside the class or objects of that class to gain access directly to my variables. So let's remove that and put it back to the state in which it was in before. Now, you might wonder, why am I bothering to do this, since I can gain access to the underscore name variable just by calling the property name? It's the same, isn't it, as gaining direct access by using the variable name? Well, in this case, in fact it is, because I give both read and write access. But if I removed one of those, if I were to comment out this part, for example, now I could read the name, that is, I could get the name value in my code by using the name property, but I wouldn't be allowed to assign a new value. And similarly, the other way around, if I removed the read access, then I'd be able to set a new name, I'd be able to write its new value, but I wouldn't be able to retrieve it if I wanted to check what the value was. So that gives me additional control over the access I'm providing to that variable. The author property is a bit more interesting. Here I've given read access directly to the variable, so I can get its value if I want to display what it was in a text box, for example. But the write access does not reference the variable underscore author. It references something called add author. Now, what's add author? Well, add author is this private procedure that I've put up here, and it takes a book string parameter. Let's have a look at the implementation of that procedure. So, let's have a look at what this does. It sets up a local variable trimmed author. It then trims the parameter unauthor. Trim is a built-in function that removes any white space, any spaces, any tabs from the start and end of the string. So if somebody adds some extra spaces into the edit box, that will be removed at this point. Then I test if trimmed author is an empty string, and that would be the case if somebody hasn't entered anything into the text box. And then I set its value to a none. Else, if the position of the space character, that's a single space character, in the trimmed author bookstring variable is 0, that is, if there is no space found in the string, then I set first name unknown. This would evaluate to true if, for example, somebody entered Dickens as the author, with no space in the name, it's just the surname, rather than Charles Dickens, and there'd be a space there, Charles space Dickens. So if a space is found, then this test does not evaluate to true, and the trimmed author name will include both the first and the second name, Charles space Dickens. But if the space is found, then this code says, well, somebody's forgotten to enter the first name, so it'll put first name unknown and append the value of trimmed author, which was the string that the user entered. So really what I'm getting at is that a lot of checking is done here before any assignment is made, and the assignment to the local variable, the private variable underscore author, is only made right at the end, after all that checking has been done. So that's one of the benefits of having this kind of access delegated by properties to, optionally, as here, to methods that can check that the value entered is correct, that it makes sense, or that can process the data entered or returned if you're doing both read and write accesses. So programmatically, it gives me much more control over how the internal variable is accessed, and I can take all sorts of extra measures to ensure that the data assigned or retrieved is in a form that makes sense to my program. Let's run this to see it in action. So let's enter name and the author name. Assign name and author and show the book. Bleak House by, and here's the example of the addAuthor method, which I showed just now. Remember, addAuthor is designated as the right accessor. That is the method that is called when somebody tries to set a value for the author property. So that has determined that there is no space in my string, so it concludes that I haven't entered the first name, and accordingly it is assigned first name unknown to the author. If I now change that, and there's now a space in it, add name and author, show book, and now it evaluates the author in a different way. It says it's found a space there, so it must have a first name and a second name, and it puts the author's name complete in there. Now, although the properties provide me with a great deal more control over the way that the internal fields are accessed, in code you can see that the syntax is the same as if I were assigning values to a public variable. So properties look like variables in terms of syntax, even though they may be implemented as methods, as I have done with addAuthor up here. So properties have two benefits. One is they give you extra control over the access of your local fields, your local variables, and the other is that they make the convention quite easy to use syntactically because they just use dot notation. So think of properties as being one of the things that you can use to ensure the privacy of the data in your objects. So by declaring name and author as private, I've been able to make sure that programmers can't gain direct access to my variables, and I'm in complete control. I can, if I wish, prevent people changing those variables in ways that I don't wish them to be changed by declaring and implementing methods such as addAuthor to intervene between the programmer's attempt to assign a value and the actual assigning in my code of that value.